But in its culmination, during the freedom struggle, the ascetic imprint was so strong that we were even taught to celebrate poverty, celebrate weakness as spiritual. In a large part, this was, you see, embodied in the behavior and teaching of Mahatma Gandhi. What most people don't know is that Gandhiji did not represent the teaching of the Gita. Although he quoted from it, he swore by it, his original turn of nature was to a particular brand of Christianity, which is Tolstoyan Christianity. And while in South Africa, he almost converted to Christianity. It was a Jain monk who advised him not to do that because it would be a bad example for the whole Indian community. But he established his ashram in South Africa and he called it Tolstoy Ashram, showing the full turn of his nature being in that particular brand of Christianity, which believed in self-flagellation, which believed in purification through suffering. And this became his catchphrase, his obsession when he came to India. Not aligning himself with the Indic spiritual values, he brought this in and presented it as representative of the Indic spirituality. The result was, although he had the Bhagavad Gita in his hand, and the Bhagavad Gita teaches fighting for truth. You see, he taught instead not to fight. He taught non-violence, suffering, and even suffering as a purification, which is the Tolstoyan Christianity, and suffering as the way by which somehow you will overcome the attacker, which of course is not reasonable nor practical. When Hitler threatened to invade England, he sent a letter to the King of England saying that you should not fight Hitler with violence. You should surrender, allow them to take over your people, kill your women and children, but you will oppose with soul force only and without violence. Now what does that mean, you oppose with soul force? You're somehow supposed to stand and something of your soul force is going to magically act on the enemy while he batters you with his weapons and kills you. What are you supposed to do with your hands? What's the point of having a body and an intelligence? Somehow all that is blurred out. And this obsessive focus on non-violence is made into a spiritual ideal. Sri Aurobindo points out that this seemed to work in India because it was under British rule. And they had a sense of fair play.
Yes. Laying across the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have said if he had tried that in China.
You know what would happen, and what would have happened under Nazi rule also.
Yes.
They were just gunned
Exactly.
down and that's it.
Exactly.
Problem finished. But here it worked or seemed to work. Actually what it did was enormously delay the freedom struggle. And in fact, the British were brought to the negotiating table not because of this, but because of others who fought, laid down their lives even, and the change that took place in the world situation because of the Second World War. So although the politically correct position is that Gandhi won freedom for India, the reality is he did not. He only delayed and led to partition. We have discussed this before. But the point thing I want to bring forward is, in the process, the deification of weakness and poverty as spiritual was embedded in the mind of the popular mind of India. What it meant was, after we won our freedom, there was still this idea that money is unspiritual. Poverty is good. Weakness is good. And strength is unspiritual. So, immediately after we won freedom, Nehru as Prime Minister declared that India doesn't need an army because we're good, right? Nobody would want to invade us. Fortunately or unfortunately, Pakistan invaded at that time in Kashmir and the army was needed and the army was the only thing which saved the situation. But that mindset continued when India was offered, and this is not known, India was offered a seat in the UN Security Council. Nehru refused it and said, China will protect us. Give that seat to China. China was not offered the seat. Nehru handed it over to China. And you know the disaster that it has caused. This mindset of wanting to be weak, meek, and feeling superior because you're weak, meek, and poor, that is perverted Indian spirituality. And that perversion has not yet been completely erased. And this I'm pointing out because it's part of the current crisis in India.
But the then Congress, which obviously, did not take heed not only to what Mother has said, but sages and saints in India have said always, that regard the word of the Rishi as an apt vakya praman. Don't then try to logicize. When a seer speaks, leave aside the avatar and the other aspect of Sri Aurobindo. The least everybody agrees upon is that Sri Aurobindo is a seer. When a seer sees and speaks, it is a proof in its own right. Just accept it, because he has seen something which we are not able to see. And Gandhiji, one can understand his problems and issues because of his strong or rather rigid ideas about external non-violence. It's not Buddhist non-violence, which is a very powerful thing. Buddhist non-violence is born of tremendous compassion, immobility. It's powerful, strong. Whereas the Gandhian non-violence is inwardly you are vibrating with even hatred and anger, but externally you are manifesting nothing. It's very dangerous. Dangerous for both, for those who harbor it and for those who are going to be its recipient, because it is of course a storm. It's like, I keep telling the other day, there was a little incident, but that apart, not going into the details. So I was explaining to these people, I said, when a woman is angry, when she, throws a tantrum, it is easy to handle. But when she is silent, it is dangerous. Men can't take it. They break down. They say, speak something. Even if you are angry, speak it out. But if you are silent, it is power. So he used that. It's a misuse of a psychological thing. Yeah. But it's not a spiritual way, because it hurts very badly those, creating further reactions. And it hurts you also because deep inside you're harboring a fire which will burn you inside. So the result of it we know now. You see, that kind of a control over Rajasic forces of anger, hatred, what did it lead to? The next phase of the yoga of the nation. Intense release of Rajasic energies. Post-independence. Sri Aurobindo had foreseen it. Because, everybody got into that movement. Well, it was allowed for the sake. And they suppressed all these Rajasic feelings. Sri Aurobindo didn't say that. During when Sri Aurobindo was actively involved, he said, okay, fine, if you want to fight, fight. No problem. He did not advocate violence, he did not advocate non-violence. But there were people who would express itself in this way, and fine. But what Gandhi did was, he suddenly made people swallow that anger, hatred. Now when Britishers were gone, where will this anger and hatred go? It got directed against each other. We had a divided country, we had partition and aftermath and all that. And this was a bad psychology in the bargain. It came back upon Gandhi himself. So, he was a poor psychologist. He was an instrument, no doubt, among the great instruments who led to India's freedom. But that should not blind us to the fact that it was a very limited understanding of nature, psychology. And the most fatal mistake was when, because of these differences, he knew that Sri Aurobindo has a different line of thought. And he even wanted to meet Sri Aurobindo, and that time Sri Aurobindo has not seen. All that is history. But probably he couldn't put it aside and look at Sri Aurobindo just as a seer at least, who has seen something. He could have asked him, but he simply, the whole Congress along with him rejected it, saying it's a post-dated check what Cripp's proposal is. A fatal error. And I think, if I am not mistaken, Sir Stanford Cripps did understand and he appreciated that there is at least one man in India who is able to see behind appearances.
Overcoming the Legacy of Mohandas Gandhi. Part 1. Only the soul knows how to live and to love. Only the soul knows how to repair missteps and misdeeds from one life to the next. Only the soul knows how to navigate life. Only the soul knows how to evolve itself. Only the soul knows how to live and how to love. Only the soul knows how to reconcile the irreconcilable. The history books glorify a man named Mohandas Gandhi, tagging him with the name of Mahatma, or Great Being. The premise of this prose poem is that he failed miserably, for he left us all with a haunting legacy. Gandhi was alive to witness the bloodbath between Hindus and Muslims. He was there for the tragic partition of India. The hatred and the tension between the two factions was exacerbated by his untenable philosophy. The division of India in 1947 was not by happenstance. It came about because Gandhi could not agree with the Muslim faction led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. For you see, Mohandas Gandhi brought forward an ineffective psychology, an ineffective philosophy. The Muslims pushed violence. The Hindus were led by Gandhi to be passive. In following Gandhi's way, the masses repressed their true feelings, and to silently hate the oppressor was the natural tendency. Mohandas Gandhi was a politician who did whatever it took to keep his large ego in front and in center stage. Unfortunately, it turns out that the psychology of holding it all in while showing a peaceful front is the way to close one's heart off to reconciliation and to love. I imagine by now Mohandas Gandhi is ready to say he is sorry. Maybe by now he has realized that he did not listen or surrender to the highest spiritual advice, as his power-hungry ego held God at bay. Maybe by now he can say he is sorry for leading so many astray. Part 2. Bapu, Fatherhood, and Hari Lal. As the head of the civil disobedient movement, Gandhi came to be called Bapu by some. Bapu is a Gujarati term that means father, and yet I question this title, as Gandhiji's most blatant failing was his relationship with his oldest son, Hari Lal. The relationship between Mohandas and his eldest son has been well documented and has received a lot of press, as Hari Lal made a loud split with his father. Disdainful of the countless numbers of rules and living indulgently, Hari Lal died at age 59, found in a gutter, like a street person might be. To catch the gist of this, let us pull up a letter that gives the inside story. In a 1935 letter, Mohandas wrote to his son and said, that Harilal's problems were more difficult for him to deal with than the struggle of the whole Indian Republic. There is a blockbuster film named Gandhi My Father, telling the woeful tale, as well as a Marathi play, Gandhi Virud Gandhi. Books include Gandhiji's Lost Jewel, Harilal Gandhi, this told by Harilal's daughter, the granddaughter. She said, Harilal wasn't just Gandhi's errant son, but a rebel who lost his way. Another one that takes a swipe is Harilal Gandhi, What Life? In a 2007 book, Mahatma versus Gandhi, the good question is asked whether Mahatma is the right name to give Gandhiji. Let's count on Mohandas Gandhi's soul to reconcile all this the next time around for each of them. Part 3. Sri Aurobindo, Mohandas Gandhi, and the Greater Light. Consumed by power and his ego, he is not so special here. Likely, the next time around, he will make amends by standing for a truth that can lead the world to a spiritual governance that truly frees people. Let us look at a key moment in the independence talks, a time when Sri Aurobindo tried to help with the Cripps proposal. In 1947, Sri Aurobindo sent an emissary to the obsessed Gandhi. It proposed the last chance for India to be free without partition. Mohandas Gandhi rudely rejected the written plea, and with this rejection, the freedom gained came at a horrific price. Can the being that came through the body of Mohandas Gandhi be forgiven for holding the world hostage to a bad psychology and an untenable philosophy? Absolutely yes, for as soon as the evolving soul makes its presence known to the evolving entity, the Divine Mother, who is all-forgiving, sets the being's karma free within the drama of that individual being. She gives each soul all the time it needs to fully surrender to the Divine Shakti. She allows all failings, and she waits for as long as necessary. So take heart and rest assured that the complete failings of any one incarnation can be turned around, that reconciliation is eventually assured. Only the soul knows how this goes. Only the soul knows how to repair missteps and misdeeds from one life to the next. Only the soul knows how to navigate time. Only the soul knows how to evolve itself in succeeding incarnations, and yet always eternal and infinite. Only the soul knows how to live and how to love. Only the soul knows how to reconcile the irreconcilables of life.
When Gandhi visited England, of course, he went with his dress, half bare-bodied. Fine, it's a statement of your attire, perhaps, but there was a huge machinery behind to to maintain that lifestyle of appearing poor. That has continued among the politicians, even today. So there are some politicians who in their fancy will live as if they're living in a village with their cows in their home and all that machinery. But there's a huge machinery there spending so much money to make you appear poor. There's the famous incident where a very wealthy industrialist came to Gandhiji with a big check, a large amount. Gandhi tore it and threw it in his face. The statement was, I don't need your money, I'm so pure. That's the implication. So money and spirituality were seen as opposite. To accept wealth is to be unspiritual. And you will see in the early movies in India, after India became free, always the rich man is the bad man. The poor man is always good, but he's weak, and that's his greatness. It stuck for a long time. It's only in the last, I will say, 20 years that this has gradually begun to be reversed. Where finally, somewhere inside, the young people said, we want the wealth, we want the comforts, we want the stuff which comes with it. We want to be able to enjoy life. Now imagine, enjoyment of life was considered as unspiritual because you're having fun. Spirituality is suffering. It is being ascetic. It is punishing your body. These are the ideals which are warped into India. And so the transition did not take place smoothly because nobody stood up to say, this is wrong. There was no great spiritual leader other than Sri Aurobindo who came forward to say, this is wrong. This is a perversion of spirituality. And unfortunately, because Sri Aurobindo had left the political field, his statement was insulated from politics. His teaching and his philosophy have been kept out, not only from the political space, but even in the textbooks of India. They will speak of him as a freedom fighter who ran away to Pondicherry, and that's it. It stops there. All the rest is locked out from the public mind. So effectively, there was nobody in the Indian popular space to bring forward this ideal of the life-embracing and life-transforming spirituality. The result has been this crisis because the inner being of the civilization rejects this perversion. It comes forward in the young people as, I want wealth, I want power, I want to enjoy life, in abandonment as if of the spirituality. But it cannot abandon because it's so deeply connected already in the civilizational in the very stuff, in the being of the civilization. There's a very interesting statement of the then 20 years ago head of the Indian Army, General B.C. Joshi. He came to the ashram, in fact, and he made this statement, and I was a student then when he said this. He said, I believe, it was a public statement he had made in an interview, that in the very genes of every Indian, there is a capital S, that is spirituality. And he said, I'm head of an army of 3 million people, and I've seen this in the people. And he gave some examples. And the fact is this, I had a discussion on some occasion where we compared the Pakistani army with the Indian army and what drives them. The Pakistani army is built on hate and fear against India. The Indian army have hate towards nobody. We don't need to go out and conquer. We're quite happy with where we are. At best, we are defending. What? We're defending something we love. You see? So the foundation of the whole warfare, even in the modern army, the culture is something you love, which you're protecting. Whereas those others have nothing which they love, they have only a hate of the other. And what happens when the two clash? Of course, this power of something more profound, more real, existent is stronger. Now, this is unique in the history of the world. I'm going to show two aspects which are unique. One is this aspect of the power and the way the Indian civilization has managed power. The other will be wealth. Nowhere throughout the history, going back 10,000 years, has India ever gone beyond its borders to invade others. Internally there are wars. But the way the war was structured, the warring communities, the Kshatriyas, they would fight. The others were left out. They didn't pillage, they didn't plunder, they didn't destroy anything. Life continued as it was while they went to the battlefield, fought, came back. It was only with the Islamic invasions that the pillage and plunder came with war. But India never stepped out also beyond its borders to conquer others. If you see the Roman Empire, it grew strong and wealthy because of the territories that it conquered and plundered. When it lost the territories or stopped the plunder, its power collapsed, its wealth collapsed. And the same thing happened with the British Empire, the same with all the colonial European countries. The wealth was from looting of others, turning others into slaves. In India, you see sustained development of wealth without needing to conquer others. I mentioned this earlier, that India was producing 25% of the global industrial output 200 years ago. And that was done purely in its creative generation, in a sustainable economic framework, without needing to fight others. So you see a sustainable economic developmental model. You see also a model of exercise of power, not just the military power but also administrative power, but sustainable in a way that can hold everybody together without needing to suppress one group for another to be strong or wealthy. And so still for the future of the world, it will be a model coming from here that will show the way. But for the moment, we have this passage where you have even now in the Indian army this same value system. There's no need to go out. Where they have been invited to go out, as happened with Sri Lanka, where the Sri Lankan government invited the Indian army to come in and solve that whole LTTE problem. The Indian army went in, cleaned up whatever it had to, went back. When they entered Bangladesh, liberated Bangladesh, went out. Nobody stayed on. You will see this unheard of anywhere in the world, in history of humanity. The US government, as you know, they're spread out in almost 300 locations all over the world with their armies. Nobody ever gets out. Once you step in, you never get out, and you turn that whole space into a resource to build your national wealth. So these are empires which are continuing in various forms. But somehow that has never happened in India. And the reason for this is this underlying spirituality that says the whole world is one family. And this statement is so profoundly rooted in the culture that you cannot think otherwise. The transition today, though, is how do you deal with power and wealth? How do you re-embrace it? And since there was not the spiritual acceptance of it overtly, explicitly, there is this passage of a reaction and then an uncomfortable relationship. So those who make the wealth, they look at it as a phase. First I will make my wealth, first I will enjoy life, then I will come back to my spiritual pursuit. So you have separated the two in time. There's still an element of guilt. I had a very interesting experience once. I went to a Vedic school. They're being taught in the traditional way, and I tried to convey this truth to them. I said to them, look, wealth is good. There's a reaction. I said, power is good. And finally, to convince them for the final punchline, I said, you know, you worship wealth as Mahalakshmi? Oh yeah, that's true. You worship power as Mahakali? Oh yeah, that's true. Okay, so somehow I fitted it in their structure of conviction. So they have to accept, they can't say no. Okay. 2 hours later, we are driving together, and then one of these guys is going through an internal churning. After those 2 hours, he pops up a question. What you said was very interesting, but I still don't understand how we can see something that is bad as good. And I said, what do you mean? You know, money is bad. How do you expect us to accept it as good? You see, wealth they had somehow accepted, but money was still bad. And when I pointed out the dichotomy, he had to struggle again. And this is an example of what's happening in India today. There are those who, having taken the turn for wealth and power, have abandoned the spiritual. There are those who have postponed the spiritual. And of late, and I say this only in the last 5 years, There are those who are attempting to integrate. Again, there has not been yet the public articulation of how these are to be united, and that you find only in Sri Aurobindo. And that's why Sri Aurobindo is so important for India and through India for the world. So in 1947, when the partition took place, it was a terrible period. Historically, it has not been sufficiently highlighted. In human history, there has not been a greater migration and a greater suffering as a result of migration as took place at that point. Millions of people died, and literally a body was torn apart across. And it was a very difficult period. At that time, mother took a marker and in a state of intense concentration, in trance-like state, she drew the united map of India in the playground. Now you see the significance of this. She did not put it in the meditation hall where people will sit for meditation. She put it in the playground. Where people exercise with their physical energies and develop their vitality. There, she sat herself, took classes. She stood. In those days, there would be a march past every day. She stood there, taking the salute. Of all the students and the sadhaks who were part of the physical program, in herself embodying the individual mother that we know, the personality that we related to as children, Mother India, Universal Mother and Transcendent Divine Mother, all four at the same time. It has such a powerful occult and spiritual import for India and for humanity. It is at the same time affirming and fixing the role that India has to play in the future of humanity and in human evolution, but at the same time invoking and imprinting consciousness in that aspect of the Divine Mother that we know as Mother India, imprinting that highest transcendent power and consciousness, not only for healing, but for awakening and for the future work which has to be done. And this with the children who march past, who exercise in front of her. The classes she took for their intellectual and spiritual training, all of that taking place right there in front of that map. There is the famous photograph where you see the mother seated with four politicians, Jawaharlal Nehru, then Kamraj, then the third, who? Shastri, Lal Bahadur Shastri, Kamaraj, and then Indira Gandhi. And it's not a coincidence, all of them became Prime Minister practically. Kamaraj was practically Prime Minister, but he played that role, and Indira Gandhi eventually. But in that sequence, literally, they're seated in that sequence they take power subsequently. And it's not a coincidence. And because the mother put all that power that she brought down for this development. Now, because we have that photo, we can see that this is what she did. If we don't have a photograph, we would not even know. There would be no physical record of it. But the work would still be done. To the extent that they were able to open to her, she was able to act on them. I heard from Udarda the narration of what he saw when the mother met Indira Gandhi. He said, she went in like a lamb and she came out like a tigress. And afterwards, mother commented that she brought down the highest power and Indira Gandhi was able to absorb all of it. Now, after that, she went back. She was at that time just a young girl who had got into politics by inheritance. Nobody gave her much importance. But with that power which the mother had imprinted in her, she went back and the whole of politics took a different turn. She split the Congress, called the new Congress, Congress I for Indira, but equally you can say I, her own individual ego. The other Congress, which had all the powerful people, they literally faded out. You do not hear of them anymore. And suddenly this woman takes over, and there's a period of a very challenging passage of India, which, according to the CIA report of that time, 1970s, it was, I think, 1972 or 73, that the CIA did an internal report which they titled The Dangerous Years, in which they declared that within 5 years, India would break apart into many different states. And really that possibility existed, at least in the way politics normally functions. But it was during that time that Indira Gandhi had power, and sometimes with the abuse of power also equally. But something happened which held the whole country together in a way that nobody could have predicted in conventional politics. And after that, the whole thing took a very different turn. I'm pointing to all this because here is one particular symbol, one particular representation of what the mother held in herself, aligning all these different levels of her consciousness simultaneously and imprinting on those who came before her that power. And you can see how initially we would approach her, and as we did as little children, through that Ishta Devata. Oh, the mother who looks after me when I fall ill, when I fall and scratch my foot, she puts a bandage, caresses me, gives me groundnuts, and smiles at me and makes me feel good. There's still children who grew up on that period. You approach them and you ask them, what was it like to be with the mother? Oh, she was like any mother. She fed us, she looked after us, she loved us. That's it. So it begins there, but you could stop there. If you didn't make the effort, you could go to the second level and see that behind this is this universal. There is the transcendent Divine Mother, and the real person, all personality, the infinite qualities, all of these are there at the same time, which also we may occasionally glimpse, get overwhelmed by, and then it fades and we meet somebody who is much more accessible. And so all these at the same time are present through this individualized personality aspect, even as at the same time there is this immense impersonal aspect which is behind. There's an interesting comment from the mother. She says, the problem with India today is the inertia, tamas. Sri Aurobindo speaks of it openly also, again 100 years ago in his writings in the little booklet called Tales of Prison Life. Mother comments on that separately. She says the British overstayed. They were supposed to have left in 1920, when in fact the whole movement had come to this poise as a result of the work they had done, that the British had come to the negotiating table. I don't know if you're aware of this. It's a very interesting incident took place in 1920. Sri Aurobindo and the mother were working for India's freedom from the occult levels equally as he had started initially from the political level. And there's this incident that mother narrates when in deep concentration, they worked together and they did something, and India Mother said suddenly, India is free. It's not will be, is free. It's done. Sri Aurobindo asked, how did it happen? Was there much bloodshed? Mother's response, she said, no, they went as they came. They foresaw the possibility of partition. It's one of the most horrible events in human history which has been completely buried. People still do not face the reality of it. It was so terrible that an entire civilization was torn apart. The entire body was split and torn apart. People from both sides were forced into a migration which nobody wanted.
Yes.
Purely because of a few politicians' greed. Millions were butchered. Millions died of starvation. Nobody will even talk about it. It's such a painful episode. And the people who witnessed it wouldn't speak about it. It was so bad. And it's not there in your history textbooks. Even in India. They
At
will
all.
not tell you what happened.
Not at all.
No, partition happened. That was it.
I see.
What happened at that point? They will not tell you. It is such a painful event. And Sri Aurobindo foresaw this possibility. And so their effort was to bring India to freedom without this division. And in the event as it was initiated from above, it was so. And interestingly, this is in 1920. Within 2 years, the British came to the negotiating table. They said, we are willing to discuss freedom. Let's talk terms. And what happened then? This is one of those tragedies of India's story. That at that time, Mahatma Gandhi had not yet become Mahatma. He had just come from South Africa. He had no real understanding of Indian values and culture. He wanted to promote himself as a political leader. And he diverted the full energy of the negotiation by saying, we do not want freedom. We ask instead that our Muslim brothers should have the right to follow the Caliph of Turkey as their religious head. Now, the entire energy of the negotiation for India's freedom was rediverted to a religious issue, where you're saying a part of your own country will owe allegiance to the religious head from another country. It's really the first step of partition. Sri Aurobindo points to this as the first step, the beginning of partition. And the British found that very convenient. The whole discussion shifted to a separate political identity based on religion. And India's freedom was set aside. Meanwhile, the other great leaders died out. Gandhi began to work to get his position, and the rest of the steps which followed only increased the basis of division along religious lines. It was only much later, and that's why when Mother said the British overstayed, it's 25 years plus that India had to wait. And when finally the last step during the Second World War, the last step was there, an attempt was made to give India freedom. Sri Aurobindo initiated on an occult level what is called the Cripps Mission.
The proposal.
And it was intended to prevent India from having a partition. And it was the last chance. He sent a special emissary from the ashram.
Was that Sardar Patel?
No,
Did
he sent a special emissary from the ashram.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember.
The lawyer.
Yeah.
What is his name? I forget the name, will come back. Yeah, he was a lawyer, And he sent him as an emissary to Mahatma Gandhi and gave the reasons why this should be accepted. And one of the reasons he gives, it's the last chance for India to be free without partition. And Gandhi rejected it, saying that tell Sri Aurobindo to look after his own affairs, not to meddle in politics. And the result was, of course, the partition. All of that has further delayed what would have been otherwise a more natural unfolding of India's spiritual destiny. The result of partition, Sri Aurobindo writes at that time after partition, he gave a message when India became free that if this continues, then there is a great danger of India, there is great danger of war, but of the delaying and even of losing the larger purpose and destiny of India. And then he says, this cannot and must not be. By whatever means, this partition has to be annulled and so on. That process again has been extremely painful. If you look at all the wars which Pakistan initiated, all the terrorism of the world, if you look at, originating from Pakistan.
Yes.
It's interesting why this has to happen. It's as if you cut off the arm of a person. Do you expect the arm to become a new person? There is no soul there. The soul is one. So when they made partition, they split off Bangladesh on one side, Pakistan on the other side. And the result was you had countries without a soul. And when you don't have a soul, what takes its place? An ego. And what's the nature of the ego? Division, fear, and hatred. So the basis of Pakistan's existence is fear and hatred for India. Because if you remove the fear and hatred, it would just merge back. There's no reason for it to be separate. And this is the problem even today. That's the reason why all the time in Pakistan you'll see the people, the politicians who come to power, they come to power on the basis of fear and hatred of India. Common man doesn't have it. It's just the politicians and the military. Because they know that you remove these things and there's no reason for them to be separate. So mother worked for this, for the reunion. She helped Indira Gandhi during the Bangladesh war, advised her to immediately free Bangladesh, guided even the people in the military during the war to the means by which the minimum bloodshed could be had. There are many interesting stories relating to that. And after that, the last step she told Indira Gandhi, now go immediately to West Pakistan and finish the problem there.
Yes, I remember that.
The Indian army had more than 150,000 soldiers of Pakistan as they had been captured, and large territories of Pakistan had been taken. It was a matter of a few days and the problem would have been finished. And at that time the US stepped in and put pressure on Indira Gandhi and stopped the war. They forced a peace treaty, and the peace treaty was like this, that Bhutto on the other side said, I cannot negotiate with my people to make peace with India unless you release all my soldiers and give back our land. And so Indira Gandhi said, okay, on good faith. Now politics doesn't work on good faith, but she gave back the soldiers, gave back the land. Bhutto said, within 6 months I will come back with a treaty, we'll make peace. Of course he was overthrown, he was killed, and the army took over. Thing never happened. There's a very interesting conversation mother has at that point, recorded in the agenda with Satprem. She said it was a huge error, because of which India will suffer a lot, and India's own development and destiny is greatly delayed because of that. And then after a few weeks, she makes a comment, I have seen how it will happen, and it will not be through war. The world situation will change, and the US will support India instead of Pakistan. And Pakistan will then begin to break up internally, and part by part, it will break into 5 parts, and part by part they would want to rejoin with India. It's very interesting to see how things have developed, especially in the last few years, and particularly in the last 6 months, that the US has openly come out in support of India,
Yes.
put open pressure on stopping funding and
terrorism.
training of terrorism in
Yes.
Pakistan,
Yes.
stopped the funding itself,
Mhm.
and many other things are happening at the same time. The result of which is that internally there are these fissures forming within the Pakistan military and polity. The specific process of breaking up need not happen in an obvious form. The point is the psychological breakup and the recognition that it does not have any existence separately. And Mother conceived of a kind of a local federal structure in which all these countries, which were once the whole of India, will come together. And we see in the last 20 years a framework called SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is precisely formed of these countries, which are the body of the soul of India, which have been brought together initially on a cultural platform, and in the last few years it has been converted into an economic platform. And with the present government, there are even structures being created linking them with highways going across, with communication systems, internal trade structures, even a shared satellite for the whole of the SAARC region and things like that. It's as if the whole space is being brought together. There's a very interesting description of Sri Aurobindo when he speaks of how when India awakes, he describes the mother will draw together. She will draw together her children